Hello, everyone. My name is Gurnoor. I'm honored to interview Professor Ben Zhao from the University of Chicago. He was on Time Magazine's AI 100 list in 2024. Professor Ben, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Ben Zhao. I'm a professor at the University of Chicago.
Yeah, could you please tell us about your areas of research?
Yeah, I do adversarial machine learning. It's basically an area inside security and machine learning, where typically speaking, we analyze different vulnerabilities and different weaknesses of machine learning models, algorithms, attacks, defenses, lots of these kind of things. Yeah.
I see several like professors creating AI for profit type companies. I'm very impressed by like the social impact of your AI research. What motivates you to focus more on the social impact of AI versus creating for-profit initiative?
Um, there's nothing wrong with wanting profit, I think, obviously. Lots of people create for-profit companies, and um, I guess I just don't have much need for it. You know, I've never been someone who's really focused that much on money in my life. And certainly as a professor at University of Chicago, we get paid enough to live well. So that's never really been a priority. I think, in the past, I've considered doing a startup. Um, but there's nothing that really motivated me strong enough to spend the time and energy to do something like a startup. Um, ultimately, I have all the things that a startup could possibly give me already in my life. So, in terms of the things that we're doing right now, it's not so much how we want to do this; it's that we need to do this. Um, the kind of projects that we're doing right now, we do it because we need to, because there's a real need for addressing some of the, harms that are being done to human creatives. And, if there were other people who were doing this, then I would probably just help them and life would be, I think, a lot less work. But there's not a lot of reasons. There's not a lot of people who are in this space doing something like this. And there are a lot of good reasons for why that is. Um, it's a very risky area to be in. There's a lot of sort of uh, different risks to reputation, to, breaking relationships with big tech. Um, for a lot of these different reasons, I think there are very few people who are actively in this space, working in public, especially given the high visibility of this space. So it's something that I think just needed to be done. So I'm here to do it.
Thank you so much. Could you please tell us about the tools to mitigate harms of generative AI? Like the generative AI models against human creatives and different.
There's a lot of harms being done in different ways. So obviously a very long conversation, I think, to go through all of it. But certainly to start, generative AI models are being trained on, whether it's visual arts or text or other forms, music, other things. They're typically trained on millions of samples of work product from professionals who've been working decades at their job, at their skill, um, all without consent, without compensation, without credit. And so that problem itself, this idea that these kind of models have taken what most people would consider to be a violation of copyright, a violation of people's rights, um, is ethically highly questionable. And I would think that many people would agree that it's frankly illegal. So, you know, the very existence of these models is only possible because of the fact that they've basically violated these social norms, these ideas that if you create something that is a work product that you are living off of, and when people take that and use it to make money, to make profit off of their own products, that at the very least you should have consent when that product is being used. There's none of that. Obviously, there's no profit sharing. So all this is sort of fundamentally wrong with the way that generative AI has been built today. Um, so that's sort of the very base case. And of course, the problem is that really, when you look at how these models are trained, how they're created, that's one thing. Um, but then these models go back and they directly compete with the people that they sort of trained on, right? That they would not exist without. So you take these exceptionally professional or exceptionally successful professional artists who've been studying their craft, practicing 20, 30 years after, many years of schooling to learn how to be a great artist. And these models take their work, train on it so that they can produce images, and then go back into the marketplace and directly compete with them to remove those artists from their profession, right? That is effectively what is happening on a daily basis. Now, it may not be, in some cases, it's more direct than others. In the cases of style mimicry, you are literally um, fine-tuning these models so that they copy and mimic the exact style from a particular artist, right? So many of these cases, the replacement is extremely personal and targeted. So someone goes and says, okay, I like this particular artist, but I don't want to pay them for their work. So what I want to do is I take, 15, 20 pieces of their art, I fine tune a stable diffusion model on their work, something that represents 20 years of their life. And in about 20 minutes or so, I can get a model that now wears that particular artist like a skin. And I can say, hey, model, give me a, uh, cat sitting in a suit of armor, sitting on a horseback on the moon, right? Something ridiculous, whatever it is. And the point being that I now control that artist's experience that their, decades of work has produced in terms of their style without their permission, without their knowledge, obviously without paying them. Um, and it's an extremely personal sort of attack, right? And if you do this, of course, um, you're directly replacing that artist and removing them from their livelihood, right? So many of these artists that I've known over the last few years have been attacked this way. And when someone does that, effectively speaking, especially when they share that model after, it is, in a way, the end of your career. You can work 20, 30 years or however long to learn that skill. And then once you finally define something as your own to be associated with your name, someone can come along and, in about 20 minutes, completely rob you of that. Or worse yet, not only take you away from that life work of style that's been defined with you, but actually turn it against you, right? People can use these fine-tuned models to create highly offensive images that take your style and create something that you would be absolutely offended and horrified by, and you have absolutely no choice. So it is very much like taking someone's skin and wearing them like a costume on Halloween or without their consent. Um, so these are very obviously serious harms, right? At the minimum, you're talking about people whose entire lives, entire careers are destroyed overnight. And in some other cases, you're talking about, job loss and replacement, and perhaps it's a little bit less personal. But still, you're talking about people who are being, entire teams, in many cases, tens or even hundreds of artists laid off together, fired in one day because some business manager believes the AI hype and thinks that, I can do better than 200, human artists if I just go, sign a contract or subscribe to Midjourney or some other similar model. And of course, they're wrong. It takes them sometimes months to realize this, that AI, generative AI, actually are so um, so far away from what human creativity can be, that by the time that they realize this, they they want to hire back the human artist, but in many cases the damage is done. Many of the people have basically lost their jobs and lost their livelihoods Some of them have had to switch entire careers. I've seen artists being forced to go drive Ubers or do some other type of gig work simply because they need some way to support themselves and their family. I've seen other people basically, become desperate just to be able to support their daily lives and wonder about how they're going to put food on the table and take their kids to school and pay for gas. So yeah, these and all these other harms, right? And in many cases, the visual artists are the ones who are being attacked the first, who are who are the feeling the some of these harms in the very beginning. Um, but of course, now it's happening up and down the creative chain. We've now seen some of this happen to story writers and writers in general, writers who create TV shows and scripts and movies and those kind of things. They're being laid off. There's now starting to be some models that target musicians. Um, and again, similar kind of stories there, maybe perhaps not quite yet models that fully replace a particular music artist, musician, but certainly enough tools now that, musicians are losing some of their jobs and people are talking about large scale replacement of certain sectors of musicians. Oftentimes it's composers, sometimes it's music effect artists. But these are still, creative people who are basically losing their jobs and livelihoods in a very quick way due to AI.
Yeah, it's very inspiring to see like your passion towards artists, especially like sort of like the ethics that go behind every aspect of it. My next question is, how do you scale your research into such an like influential movement for artists?
How do we scale? I don't know. Uh, we do what we can. Um, I think part of it is the recognition that, you know, you need to design things so that it's not purely centralized around us. Obviously we've designed tools that can be used by anyone over a computer. Um, but at the same time, we've been trying, or I've been trying hard to make sure that lots of artists can help in the process. So in terms of just publicizing and teaching other artists about the dangers of generative AI, I think there's thousands of artists who are actively sort of spreading the message and taking some of the knowledge that they've gained about generative AI, how it works, what its vulnerabilities are, what the damage is, and sort of helping educate their peers about the risks. And they're doing all this without me. Sometimes I can answer questions, I can point them to technical papers that they can read. But generally speaking, most of these are doing all this by themselves. Um, but yeah, in terms of what we do, we just do what we can. That's all there is to it. It's not so much, I think the perhaps the perspective that's different is that this is not about making a project successful, right? So if I were worried about scaling up a particular project and making it scale to a certain point and defining that as success, then there would be a different plan, right? But this is not really about that. This is more about just having an impact in the world and trying to mitigate harms to individual real people. And so project success is really kind of irrelevant. Um, if this were a startup, the success of the startup would be irrelevant um, because it's the net impact that actually matters, right? So if we scaled not so well and we could only save, let's say, a few thousand people, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that because that's a few thousand people that we are hopefully, protecting and saving their jobs and making sure that they and their families don't lose their incomes, right? So it really that's how I see it is it's not so much about success for us, it's much more about just how much good can we do because there's always more. There's always more that needs to be done. And so, in a way, uh, many people are happy with our success, but it's never enough, right? Because um, it's difficult to estimate how much impact we've had, but certainly we've had something like 4.8 million last I checked last month of downloads of Glaze and 1.9 billion of Nightshade. And, I mean, how many of those are individual real artists around the globe? I don't know. But I imagine at least probably over 1 million. And how many of those people actually use it on a regular basis? Again, who knows? Um, but I think more importantly, just the idea that uh, some of these numbers don't really matter, right? Because every single additional person, even if it's just one more person, that is meaningful. And I think the reason the reason is that I'm reminded of this every single day when I interact with these artists. We get emails on a daily basis, we get messages on every social platform on a daily basis. Um, and so, yeah, it's just a constant reminder that it's not so much about the project itself, it's just actually about the people that it impacts. And every single one person that says, I can finally post my art again, I can do commissions again, I don't have to give up my job. That's, daily affirmation of our success in a very tangible way. So yeah, so that's how we see it. And so the scale will never be enough, because I think certainly right now there are thousands, perhaps 10,000, perhaps more of artists who are constantly asking us for more access to Glaze because they don't have computers, and so they had to rely on our service, our web Glaze service, which we just run as a free web service off our own lab servers at University of Chicago. And we can't ever, we're not fast enough to give out enough accounts. And so we need to fix that. But, you know, so there's always more, right? For every person, artist who sends us a message and says we're helping them and they feel there's hope and all these good things. For every one of those, we have others, many more, who are waiting in the queues, waiting for access to Glaze, who are desperate for protection. So yeah, so that's where we are. It's never going to be enough, but we do everything we can because every single additional user is something that some amount of good that we've done.
Thank you for that. Um, in general, should ethics be integrated into AI at the beginning itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think even back in the very early days of Glaze, back in end of 2022, maybe early 2023, one of the comments I often said to journalists is that one of my takeaways is that this entire generation of technology and how we've been using it is in many ways a reflection on the failure of a generation of computer scientists who never study ethics. And, it's not that like studying ethics will like all of a sudden make you more moral or, make you be generous, altruistic people. It's not that. It's more like just understanding the frameworks of how to reason about ethics would at the very least allow people to have a conversation about what is right and what is not so right. And right now, without those tools, without this idea of even contemplating what is morally correct and what is, what the trade-offs that people are making, um, in that absence, I think the simple solution is to go to money because it's much easier to react emotionally to some of these things, right? And currently today, big tech is able to use some of these sort of philosophical tricks to basically argue for why these generative AI models are so important, that they are in fact above the law. They are above any localized amount of harm that we can raise, that we can discuss. Because you can point to something like the potential end of humanity and its, loss to AGI, which of course is a red herring to begin with. But you can point to that and say, look, that is in itself far more important than climate change. It's more important than any amount of job loss to any subpopulation of people. It's more important than any sort of unemployment rate. It's more important than anything else, period. But these are fallacies and sort of philosophical thinking that I think if more people had taken philosophy, they would understand what stance this is. And this is not new. These are extremes of like utilitarianism that have been studied, many years ago, and people once you recognize what it is, they generally speaking disregard it. But uh, but yeah, but without the study of ethics, without the study of philosophical frameworks to even discuss these kind of questions, people react things to things emotionally, and then you end up having these conversations where they say, let's bring up nuclear reactors because if there's even a tiny amount of chance that this will prevent the death of humanity, then yes, destroying the universe or destroying the planet is worth it. But these are logical fallacies that people need to walk past.
It's an interesting thing to look at it. What advice would you give to a high schooler considering a career in academic research, particularly in computer science for sort of impact?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't think doing this or being able to do this makes me particularly an expert or particularly insightful at answering that question. Um, I think I would say same thing I did before we started these kind of projects. Research is the discovery of new knowledge. It's the creation of new knowledge, just the ability to ask interesting questions about the world and what we could create. In terms of impact, there's lots of impact in different ways. And there's different opportunities for impact. And, prior to this, we've had I've written close to 200 publications, research publications. I've built lots of systems that have been used by corporations, some of which have been deployed on large scale systems and impacted millions of people. But it's about being at the right place at the right time, right? And for something like generative AI, this particular scenario, it was literally the question of just here was an immediate harm, and we were one of the very few, and certainly one of the earliest to be shown this problem. And I am still one of the very few who has the agency to do something about it, right? Younger faculty don't have that power. Younger faculty who had to worry about tenure, who had to worry about funding from perhaps big tech companies. They had to worry about their students getting jobs after getting their PhD, so they can't burn the bridges with big tech. So there's a lot more to lose for most people in my profession. And it just so happens that I happen to be senior enough or successful enough to not care about these kind of things. Um, and to be comfortable enough with my reputation that I don't need to worry about sort of burning bridges and putting my reputation at risk because I've done most of the things I've wanted to go after in my career. So, I think it's just being at the right place at the right time, which basically means that it's a lot of luck. And so, had this stuff not happened, I would still be the same person doing the same thing, or different things, but similar type of research. So I think it's just about, ultimately wanting to create impact. You can do that in many different ways. And you have to find out personally what works for you, right? Many people create significant impact, um, by going into the industry, by doing startups. And most of those people create very much positive impact in different ways. And so it just so happens that my path is in research and academia, and I've been able to create impact in this direction. But for every single person, you or other people, it is about finding out what it is that you're good at, what it is that drives you, right? And going along with that. Don't feel like you have to walk a particular path that someone else has laid out for you. It really is about finding your own path and what motivates you, what drives you, because at the end of the day, walking someone else's path is not going to motivate you. It's not going to sustain you in the long term, right? It may in the short term, but you'll find it unfulfilling and perhaps not nearly as rewarding as you hoped it to be.
Okay, thanks a lot for t taking the time to talk to me. I admire like your enthusiasm and passion for artists.
My pleasure. Yeah.